This week's Torah portion is talking about Korach. Korach is a man that made a very successful, at least in the beginning, war against Moshe. He got all the Jewish people behind him, even the tribe of Levi, which is the tribe of Moshe himself. And they all decided they were going to depose Moshe. That Moshe was finished, basically. And there were a lot of different reasons for this, and there's a lot of different reasons according to KABALA, according to this. Because at first glance, it's totally not understandable what happened. I mean, Moses took the Jews out of Egypt. They would have never left Egypt if it wasn't for him. They would have never received the Torah. They wouldn't have gone across Yam Suf, across the Red Sea. They didn't want to. They wanted to go back. They wanted to go back countless times. We just finished seeing with the spies just last week. the Jewish people, at least here in Israel, you'll see it the year Shabbos if you're in America outside of Israel, that the spies, all the Jewish people refused to go in the land of Israel. And God said, I'll wipe them all out. I'll wipe them all out. I'll make you a new nation. So if it wasn't for Moshe, they would have never gotten out of Egypt. They would have never gotten the Torah. They would have never survived. And all of a sudden comes Korach, who was absolutely nobody. He didn't do anything for the Jewish people whatsoever, except that he was very rich and clever. And he convinces everybody to make a rebellion against Moshe. So the logical reason that's given behind the whole thing is, and there's other reasons also. Not the question why he made the revolution. People were going against Moshe all the time. Why he was so successful. How he convinced everybody to follow him. In the previous chapter, Torah chapter, we can understand why. The people didn't want to go into the land of Israel. They wanted to stay in the desert where it was good for them. And they got free food and they got free water and they could sit and learn Torah and they were quiet. They had no enemies. That we can sort of understand. But why all of a sudden here, what did Korach do to convince the people to go against Moshe? He didn't promise them anything. He didn't say anything to them. Why? So one of the logical explanations is that he said exactly that to the Jewish people. Moshe was great. To take us out of Egypt, we needed him. To go out of, receive the Torah, we needed him. We had to follow every word that he said, Moshe, because we didn't really know what to do. We were new, we were fresh, we were slaves. And Moses was talking to God. God is the creator. So he was looking at things from God's point of view. And in order to get out of Egypt, we needed Moshe. In order to receive the Torah, we needed Moshe. Okay, but we already got out of Egypt and we're already received the Torah. And Moses insists on lording it over us and telling us what to do all the time. And we can't take it anymore. It's enough, right? It was enough. We admit that when to get out of Egypt and we had to listen to every word that he said. Good. So we trusted him, we got out. Okay, but enough. Moshe himself should admit that his job is finished and let's, have a democracy or whatever you want to call it. What was this monarchy that Moses rules over us? So enough with Moshe. That's the logical reason. That's sort of a logical reason behind the whole thing. Another logical reason is that's the nature of the Jewish people. The nature of the Jewish people is that they're contentious people. What do they call it? Stiff-necked. They make up their minds to do something and they'll do it. But before they make up their minds, so they're looking around for something to make their mind up about, something to be stubborn about. And that's what Korach convinced. Okay, but that's a very external and a not very logical reason when it comes right down to it. Because of that, everybody's going to go against Moshe, and Moshe was so great. All of a sudden, all of the Jewish people went against him. It says he unified everybody. So let's see. There was something. How do you say? A personal, something psychological, you want to call it, that's going on over here. Something churning inside of each and every Jew, or inside of the Jewish people as a whole, was churning around over there that every Jew felt from himself. He didn't have to be convinced to go against Moshe. Something inherent in Moshe that is the opposite of something that's inherent in every Jew. Okay, so we're going to see what that is. And obviously, if it's in every Jew, it's inside of us also. So we have to figure out what this is. Here we go. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi. It says that Korach took, and Rashi explains he took himself aside. He separated himself. Who was he? He was the son of Yitzhar. Who was Yitzhar? Yitzhar was one of the sons of Korach. Who was Korach? Korach was one of the three sons. I'm sorry, was a son, Kahat, and Kahat was one of the three sons of Levi. Remember, we just learned this Kahat and Merari and Gershom, three sons of Levi, and they each one had their own things that they carried, the items of the tabernacle that they carried when they were traveling in the desert. And Kahat, he was the most special one. They carried the ark, they carried this. And Kahat had a son was called Yitzhar, and Yitzhar had a son which was called Korach. Korach made all the trouble. Okay, Lahavin Inyan, let's understand the whole topic of the Machlokas Korach, of the argument between Korach and everybody on Moses and Aaron. Okay, now why do we, I mean, historically it's very interesting. Do you ever read, there's all these history professors, and they make analysis of history. And some of them, they do it on a dialectical way, and this way, in the spiral way. There's also different ways of analyzing history. But now we're not talking about history. I want to talk about, this is a historical thing that happened, but it's happening right now. Every generation has to have a Moses. If we don't have a Moses, we don't have one Jew that's totally different from all the other Jews, and he is trying to tell the Jews what they're supposed to be, how the Jews are totally different from everybody else. And there's one Jew that he's totally different from the Jews, and he's trying to convince the Jews, what is it in the Jewish people that's different from everybody else? What does it mean that we're chosen of God? What does it mean that we're the sons of God? Right? Bani Matam, Bni, Bechor Yisrael. What does it mean, my chosen ones? The Jewish people that are my chosen, my sons, they're my soldiers. What does all this mean? That's what Moses is supposed to do. He wakes up inside of every Jew. Without a Moses, there's no Jewish people. Jewish people become normal like everybody else, a religion like everybody else, or a race, whatever you want to call it, is like everybody else. Right? Or at least they act like it. They forget who they really are. So Moses comes basically to make the Jewish people crazy. There has to be a Moses, and there's a Moses and Moshe inside of each one of us. That's the awareness that we're Jews. We're even non-religious Jews. I'm a Jew. So it's very, very relevant to us, because there has to be one person in the world that tells us, what does this feeling mean? I'm a Jew. The most irreligious, the most anti-religious Jews, and they'll say that they're a Jew. They don't believe in God. They're total atheists. They're communists. They want to do away with religion. Right? I think now we're in the days that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in 1927, he was arrested in Stalin's Russia, and he was put into prison. He was arrested by Jews. And there was even a special, how do you say, a special group, what do you want to call it? They were called Yevtseksia, the Jewish sector. And they were Jews. They were all Jews, and they hated Judaism. That was their whole thing. They wanted to destroy Judaism. They killed a lot of people. They wanted to kill the Rebbe. That was the plan. They were supposed to kill the Rebbe the first night that he got in, and they got somehow or other confused. They didn't kill the first Rebbe. He went down the wrong hall or something. A whole long story. The Rebbe writes about it. These were Jews. I imagine there must have been several hundred of them at least. And these were Jews that were against Judaism. Their whole purpose was to destroy Judaism, and they were Jews. And they knew that they were Jews, and they claimed, they even made a Jewish group. So there's the Jew, no matter what it is, he knows that he's a Jew. Well, why is he a Jew? A person is black, so he knows he's black. He can look in the mirror, he sees that he's black. A person that's Oriental, he looks at, how does a Jew know that he's a Jew? He looks in the mirror, he sees that he's a Jew. How does he know that he's a Jew? Something inside of him says he's a Jew. Moses is the one that explains what this is and activates it. So it's very relevant to us also. What is this Moses in our generation? In our generation, the Moses of our generation is the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's the one that's making all the Jews crazy. Okay, now let's see how Korach succeeded. Here we go. Ready? Rabbos and Midrash Rabbah in this week's Torah portion of Midrash, Parsha Zu, says Om Rav Levi, says Rav Levi, Lama Chalak Korach, why did Korach disagree with Moshe? Omar, he said, Ani Bano Shel Shemen. He said, I am the son of oil. Yitzhar means oil. Yitzhar means oil. Tirosh is wine and Yitzhar is oil. I'm the son of oil. You're going to see this is going to sound pretty stupid. So there must be some point to it. Listen to this. Korach, and he convinced all the Jewish people with this argument. Listen to this. He says, I am the son of oil. My Korach, my father's name is oil. Yitzhar means oil. Like it says, Ben Yitzhar, I'm Ben Yitzhar. Shenei Amar, like it says, V'tiroshecha v'yitzarecha, like it says, if you do what I say, I'll give you your wine and your oil. Tirosh means wine, and this is the second chapter, second paragraph of Shema Yisrael. Asher nishba lavotecha latet lecha, that the land that your fathers promised to give to you. Rosh Parshas, this is the beginning of Rosh Parshas Ekev. Tirosh, this is wine. Yitzhar, this is oil. Ubakal mashkin, and all of the liquid. So I am the son of oil. That's what his father. My father's name was oil. Yitzhar, that's oil. Bakal mashkin, any liquid should titain at the shemen, that you put oil in any liquid. Hu nimsa elyon, it'll always float to the top. Uma elu. So these she mashchu b'shemen, Aaron and Moses, that they were anointed by, really, essentially Aaron that was anointed with oil, milavad, nitlu kahuna, they took the kahuna, being the priests, and malchus, and the kingship, Moshe, that these two were anointed only with oil. They're only anointed with oil on the outside. Anisha, ani banu shashaman, I am the son of oil. My oil is in the inside, it's my father. It's not, this is, am I not anointed, and I should be a priest and a king? Immediately he disagreed with Moshe. And everyone agreed with him. Ad kan lashon. Look over there. That's what it says in the Midrash. Well, Lahavin said, let's understand this. I mean, does that really make any sense? It's so unique. He said, my father's name is oil, therefore it's better than these people that were just anointed with oil. They're just anointed, that's nothing. But it says in the Torah, you have to anoint the people in order to, it doesn't say anything of your father's name. What is he talking about? And all the Jewish people, they all said, oh yeah, that's, yeah. Well, we agree with you there. What's going on here? And what's going on inside of us? How could we would also be convinced by such an argument? What is the argument? To go against the Rebbe. Right? It's a convincing argument. It's going on inside of us all the time. What is it? Let's go. In order to understand this, V'gam also a shaykhos, the connection to the machlokas, this argument, shechalak al kahuna, that he that he disagreed with the priesthood of Aaron, b'chalak gamken, and also on the mitzvah tzitzis. It says that he also disagreed with tzitzis. So Korach, basically, he wanted to be the high priest, and he also really wanted to usurp Moshe also, and also it said he went against the commandment of tzitzit. How do we get that? Because last week's Torah portion, by you people outside of Israel, this is this week's Torah portion, right? So last week's Torah portion, it ends after the whole story of the spies. It ends with the commandment of tzitzis. Remember, we talked about it last week. So that's the commandment. What's the commandment of tzitzis? There's a garment, and there's strings that come out of the garment. You have to put special strings on the garment. That's the commandment of tzitzit. And it says that corresponds to all of the commandments, because it's the numerical value of 613. The word tzitzis is 600, and the strands with the knots, that's another 13, 613. So tzitzis, that corresponds to all the commandments. Korach disagreed. And it was the argument worked. What was the argument? The argument was, he said, also tzitzis. Rashi says like this: Talit shechula techelet And the commandment of tzitzit is there's one strand that has to be of wool, right? Two of the 8 strands has to be of wool, and they have to be blue. They have to be blue. Like I said, nowadays there's a lot of people in Chabad also we don't put blue because it's not really necessary, and we say that we don't have the proper color that we had back then. In any case, the ideal commandment is going to be blue. In days of Mashiach, we're going to find this worm again, or maybe we'll find that the people who found the worm that they were really right and that there really was. In any case, there's going to a talit. So it says a talit. What has one strand of blue, right, on the tzitzis? That is doing the commandment. What about a talit shekula techilat? What about if you have the talit and it's all blue? It's all blue wool. It's dyed with a special dye that comes from the certain snail or something. So he said, a talit that is blue, the whole thing is blue. Does you have to put tzitzis or not? Moses said, the law is that you have to have tzitzit on a garment. Doesn't make any difference what color the garment is, right? If the garment is this color of blue, you have to put tzitzis, you have to put strings on it, and 2 of those strings have to be blue. Everybody laughed at him. Everybody laughed at Moshe. Moshe, are you kidding? What do you have to have one little strand of blue on a garment that's totally blue? The whole thing is blue. The whole thing is colored techelet. You have to have one more strand that's going to make a difference. And everybody laughed at him. It says that he also said the same thing about the mezuzah also, but here we're talking about he said a house that's filled with books of Torah, the Torah scrolls. Does it have to have a mezuzah on the door? The whole thing is filled with Torah scrolls. The 2 paragraphs of the mezuzah, that's just 2 sentences from the Torah. Here you have the whole Torah. You have 1,000 Torah scrolls. Right? It's written the whole entire Torah. You have to have a little box with 2 paragraphs of the Torah on the door. And Moses said, yes, you do. And everybody laughed. Okay. So here we have Korach now, according to the Midrash, we're explaining that there were 2 points to his argument, seemingly totally irrational. Makes no sense. So we're going to make sense of it. And this made sense to the Jewish people. This convinced all the Jewish people. What were they? Number 1, he said, my father's name was oil. Therefore, I'm better than Aaron and Moses. They were just anointed with oil on the outside. I'm oil from the inside. And everybody said, yay, right, you are. And he said, I got some more to say. What if you have a garment that's a talit, and it's all blue colored, this special blue color? Does it have to have 1 string of blue on the corner? And Moses said, yeah. And everybody said, he said, see, what a fool you are, Moses. And everybody said, yay, Korach. Okay, what's going on over here? But Gam also, Bisa Barabo said, also it says another thing in Midrash Rabbah, Shinit Kana, that he was ashamed. He was jealous. Lefi, because Shebelevim and the Levites, it said, Haviru Tar, says the Levites, they have to shave off all their hair. The Aaron Achiv, Kashtu, and Aaron had a beautiful beard, and this. Okay, this was only in the inauguration that they had to do that, but nevertheless, Aaron, it says, how do you know Aaron had a beard? Because King David, in his Psalms, it says over there in one of the Shir Hamalot, it says, where is it? Mashkatu Kesheman Hatov Yored al Zakan. It says like the good oil that comes down on the beard of Aaron, Zaken Aaron, the beard of Aaron. Right? What is it? Psalm 133 or something. Go and look and see. 134. Well, Lahavin calls that to understand this. Tzurich Lahavin, we have to understand for a little bit. First of all, what is this thing about tzitzit? Okay, what is this whole commandment of making tzitzit? This is going to be relevant to you people outside of Israel because that's where your Torah portion ends. Your Torah portion is what we read last week, tzitzit. The Kettiva says, Asulam tzitzit p'til tchilit, that you have to put on it 1 string of blue, b'zachartam, and you will remember all the commandments of God, v'lo taturu, and you will not stray after your eyes and after your heart. You look at the tzitzit, you look at the blue, and you won't go after your eyes and your heart. Some people say, you'll see the blue string. Some people say it means don't look at, you'll see the commandment of tzitzit. In any case, somehow or other, looking at these tzitzit that you have in the corner of your garment, right here we got the garment, here we have the tzitzit. Remember I showed you last week. This is the strands, the strings. There we go. See, there's the strings on the corner of your garment. You look at that and you won't go after your eyes and your heart. The Inyan is like this. The Hine Kasiv, it is written, Malekol or it's Kavodo. It says, okay, now we're going to talk about God. Because that's the main topic of Judaism, right? The main topic of Judaism is God. It says the whole world is filled with God's glory, Kavodo, just God's glory, not God himself. Ziv Yikare, it says a ray of God's glory. A ray, is Kavod. The Kativ, and it says that the Shemai, but the earth's animale, it says the heavens and the earth I fill. Not just my glory, I myself personally. You do, it's known, which is these two levels of Mamali Kolman and Sovi Kolman. These are two aspects of God, one which fills the world and the other one which surrounds the world. Like it says, Ani, in the Maimor, I'm sorry, in one of the Hasidic discourses called Ani Ladodi. Okay, another place. But this is also the whole idea of Torah and the commandments. Hainu Kativ, it says, Levushe in Daniel, one of the visions of Daniel. It says, I saw God sitting on a throne, and it says his garments were talag chavir, like, this is Aramaic, like snow, white snow. The sa'ar reshe and the hairs of his head, ka'amar nake, like wool that is clean, also white wool. So he said, Daniel saw this vision of God. What does it mean he saw God? He saw how God manifests himself, let's say the world of Atzilut, whatever. And it says his garments were like white snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. Also white wool, pure wool. Hainu, this is referring to two aspects of God, his garments and his hair. What type of garments and hair does God have? It says this is talking about two aspects of God. Soviv calling that which God, so to speak, is incomprehensible. It surrounds the world. This is called God's garments. Like it says, Hashem Melech Geut Lavesh. Like it says, God is a king and he puts on glory. This is garment. That's the whole source of the commandments. That they're called garments. And this whole level of God's, the hair of God's head. Okay, this whole thing of the hair of God's head. One minute. Ubechinas, yeah. Ubechinas sar, and this level of the sar, sar reshi, the hair of God's head. This is what's called masha meir bechinas pinim. These are strands, like the strings of the tzitzis. This is what strands comes to be mamali kolmin. How God fills the worlds. B'zeh shor Torah. Okay, a short explanation. What's going on over here? But just one more sentence. The commandment of tzitzis. There are also these two different levels of godliness representing. There's what's called the garment, and then there's the hairs. Like it says, okay, atali, the tarmet, the garment. This is what's called the talit, right? The garment here that we have like this. That's what's called levushe. That's God's garment. That's mainly the main commandment of the talit is it has to be white. It's supposed to be white from wool. Akabasim. Shehu ka'amar levushe. This is the Indian of the garments katalag chavir, like white snow. That's soviv kolmin. That's how God surrounds the worlds. And the tzitzit, that's what's it has to be supposed to be made from the same substance as the garment. And this is what's called the hairs of God's head. This is the 32 strands of the tzitzit that corresponds to what's called the 32 in the book of Sefer Yetzirah. There's the 32 paths of God's wisdom. It says that it's the 22 letters of the alphabet and the 10 sfirot. This is what's drawn down to shine in a way of inner light. Okay, let's talk about this a second. God. What is God? According to Judaism, according to the way the Chassidut explains it especially, and that's the really only way to look at it, is that God is creating everything all the time. There is nothing except for God. Also, the Rambam, Maimonides, says simple fact. Time, space, consciousness, being, it's all created by God. We've repeated this a lot of times, but no matter how many times we repeat it, it's still something that we can talk about, but we don't feel it. And it's the truth. It's the reality. It's the fact. God is creating everything there is. Everything that there is in the world, me, you, all the blades of grass, all the bugs, all the atoms, all the quarks, all the space, all the time, all the consciousness of the angels and these stars and these other different worlds and the people on Mars, if there is such things, right? And there could be. It's all being created by God. Only one God. And God is creating everything, and he's creating everything constantly. He's creating everything from nothing. And we have no way of understanding what this means. Nothing. But that's the fact. God is creating it from nothing. The whole world, everything that's in it is a big miracle. Every detail of the world is an incredible miracle. So, but everything is different. Everything is different in the world. There's no two things that are exactly the same, if for no other reason that everything is in a different place. Every atom has its place, every different time. So everything in the world is different. The whole entire creation, and it's all moving. It's either building or it's decaying. But everything in the world is changing, interacting, and different one from the other. That's only in the physical world. Then there's spiritual worlds. Same thing there. Everything is different. Every detail is different. And in a way, it's more complicated than this world. Infinite numbers of differences. Because this world takes up place in time. The spiritual worlds don't take up place in time. And then there's higher and higher spiritual worlds. Right? And these are like at the basis of all these other religions. A person, because these spiritual worlds are intensely personal. They're real. They're. It's not like some, what is it? The Roman mythology or something. Sitting some god on a mountain, or on whatever it is, on a cloud, and he looks down at the people and he sends down, interacts with them a little bit. It's intentionally personal. This is real. It's a source of our life. He says if a person sees an angel, he go berserk. So God is creating all of this difference. That's what's called mamali kolim. Everything is different from everything else. That's how God fills the world. Don't think like a lot of Jewish thinkers think, and they'll still insist that it's true, even though I say this, that God created the world a long time ago, whenever it was. And it doesn't make any difference. It was 5,000 years ago, or 5 trillion, or 5 quadrillion years ago. He created the world it's wrong. He created the world a long time ago, and he let it go. And now, because God is so powerful and he's so omniscient and so omnipotent and so that he can do anything he wants to. He can do anything he wants to, and therefore he's got like surveillance cameras. He's got 1 million eyes or something like that. It's almost like this, this Hinduism. Got 1 million eyes, and he sees everything that's going on. 1 million hands, so he's directing everything. But he's a separate being. No, it's not so. The fact is, the world does not exist on its own at all. Totally not. If God removed himself from the world, there wouldn't be a world. Wouldn't be a world. I mean, it could be. God could do anything he wanted to, but he didn't do it that way. He didn't do it that way. Okay, so what it means is that God is infinitely close to us. But if he's infinitely close, why don't we see him? So the reason is because God concealed himself with all this diversity that he made in the world, with all these worlds. The word for world means concealment. That's what's called the mamali, how God fills the worlds. Everything is different. Everything has a different type of life in it and a different type of a body to it. And it's tremendously, tremendously, tremendously complicated. All the spiritual worlds and all that's how God creates everything differently. That's the 22 letters of God's speech, it says, and God's 10 sfirot. That's represented by the 32 strings on the tzitzis, how God articulates himself. Huh? But then there's another aspect of God, which is called God. And that's how God creates everything the same. Everything exists. Angels exist. I exist. You exist. Trees exist. What did you say?
Menachem's in the waiting room.
Menachem is in the waiting room. He was just here before. How can it be? 1 second. How can this be? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Yeah, yeah. What happened? All right. Thank you very much. We released Menachem. I want to get rid of this thing. I don't know how to get rid of it. Okay. So that's what tzitzis are. Tzitzis, these are, okay, so we have the garment. That's like how God surrounds the world, so to speak. He's completely incomprehensible. And then we have the tzitzis that come out from it. That's the different aspects of God, how they come out. That corresponds to the 32 paths of wisdom, it says. It's drawn down in an inner light. This is called Reshit Giloi. This comes from Chachma. Chachma is the beginning of God's revelation. Somebody's making noise over there playing some sort of a drum. Please. Okay, the be'er. Okay, now let's explain this. I'm sorry. Yeah. There, first of all, has to be, we have to understand what is this, what's called or panimiv or makif, an inner light of God and a surrounding light of God. And there's a lot of names given for these things, but they're all referring to something a little bit different. This is what's called igulim v'yosher. Igulim v'yosher. How God surrounds all being and how he is inside of everything. The same thing is called an or panimi, how God is inside of everything. Everything is different. And there's also a surrounding light around everything. And also the same thing, igulim, which is called circles and lines. All right. Now we have to realize here we're talking about the creation, and the creation is happening every instant. So we're trying to talk about God, how God is creating everything, and God is not removed from anything. He just hides himself. The inyan is like this. You can ask a question, how is there evil in the world? That's not for here. That's not for here. That, in the 6th chapter of the Tanya, it talks about this. 6th chapter, 24th chapter, other places also. The inyan it's like this. Or this inner light of God. That what goes into different vessels. Yosher. That's what we said is straight. That's igulim. We said this straight light of God. Padraga, Milo, Mata, there's top, there's bottom. All these Kabbalistic ideas. Usually the Kabbalah deals with only this, what's called inner light of God. That's Chabad, Chagas, Nahi, the 10 Sfirot of God. That's all the different aspects of God, how God's spiritual comes down from higher spiritual to lower spiritual to lower spiritual, right? And all the Kabbalistic books, it talks about that, the secret of the 22 letters of the alphabet and how you make these different gematrias and permutations. But then there's what's called an Or Makif, a surrounding light of God, and that's called a light of existence. Huma shalo haya yochol, this is what is not able to go in any vessel at all. Because of the tremendous light. This becomes above any vessel. The bechinas makif, that surrounds everything. It was the fact that everything exists is incomprehensible. That's why you can get all these scientists and all these philosophers and everything, and they can talk about all the different aspects of the world, energy and mass and matter and even spirit. There's what's parapsychology and all these things, and all this is in the aspects of God, how God articulates himself. But the aspect of God is his existence, how he creates everything. This is out of the comprehension of any human being, even the angels. And this is totally impossible to understand because it's not in the level of understanding. There's no example we can use to understand. So nothing creates anything in this world. There's no example of creation from nothing. We don't know what nothing. That's what's called what surrounds the world. That's what's called eagle. That's what's called the big circle. Shu makif mirosh baregel, that it surrounds everything at once. Like I say, existence, the upper worlds, the highest level of angels that all of the non-Jews base their religions on. They call it God, they call it whatever they want. But all the highest level that there could possibly be, right? This is a level. And it's all the same, exactly the same to God. God is creating the whole business constantly, and he's making all these differences and these changes and variations and diversity. God is creating all this from what's called the light, the inner light of God. That's what's called mamalikom. That's represented by the strands of the tzitzit. But so to speak, God himself, the creator, that he creates everything. He has the power of creation. Everything that exists, the power of existence, this is out of the ken of human beings. A human being can't know, even angels. You do, it's known in Eitz Chaim, the KABALA book of Eitz Chaim, that the idea of the kav and the chut says that God in the beginning, in the Torah, it's called God's speech. There is the beam of light, of godliness, that's drawn down from the Or Ein Sof, from the infinite light of God. This is in order that it should be drawn down in an Or Panimi, in an inner way, that there should be worlds. And the beginning is what's called Chachma. That's the highest of the 10 sphirot, the 10 aspects, if you want to call it, of God. And all these 10 sphirot and the 22 letters and everything, that's represented, what we said, of the 32 paths of wisdom. That's what we call how God fills the world. Shemeir b'kol olam, that it shines in every world according to its level. But this aspect of God, which we said is like the talit, which surrounds all the worlds, this is Or Ein Sof. This is what's called the infinite light of God that surrounds all the worlds equally. Mirosh, from the highest level of Ak. What is Ak? Adam Kadmon. Ad Ragli Dasiya, until the bottom levels of Asiya, which that's where we are. So this level of Ak we don't know, but Asiya, that's just here we are. Gam Makif et Akav, it surrounds all this beam of light. Okay, so there's this Kabbalistic principle, which is called the Tzimtzum. And it comes to explain how it is that if God is really one, how did he make this world? And a world that seems to totally contradict the existence of God. But you don't see God, you don't feel God, you can't even comprehend what it is. What is God? What does that mean? God creates me all the time. That's makes no sense. It's not that it makes no sense. It's not even in the category of sense. So how can it possibly be doesn't? So it says that the beginning of this whole entire business is from what's called the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum. God has this power to conceal himself. Now this is not, if you want to call it, before the world was created, because before God started creating the world, there was no time, there was no before. This is just a level that exists right now. This is just a level of being that God decided. This is right, things that we have no comprehension of, but it comes to explain to us how God creates the world and how important the world is to God. Made all these steps to create the world. Meshavim Mirosh, this is from the head of all levels to the bottom. Now, this world is tremendously important to God. We have to get our priorities correct over here. The world is tremendously, we have to think about God. It says when the Moshiach comes, we'll only be thinking about God. The most important thing to us should be God. What's the most important thing to God? What's God, so to speak, thinking about all the time? He's thinking about the world. So to speak, God has no other thought on his mind. There's nothing more important to God than us, than this world. I mean, this makes no less sense than what we're talking about here, but that's the fact. That's the whole point of the Torah. Before the world existed, nothing existed. There was no existence. There was just a creator. There was no time. There was no before the world. And every instant of this world is eternal. What we do in this world has an effect on God. That's the fact. The world is infinitely, infinitely important to God. Infinitely important to God. So we should be thinking only about God. And what's God thinking about this physical world? This physical world is the most important thing. In order to make this physical world, so there are these great people like the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal, and they explain the amazing processes which are going on in order for God to make this world. How much God loves us, we have no idea. So it says that's what's called this beam of light, which comes from God's oneness after this tzimtzum, after this contraction. That's called the beam, the kav. And like I say, in the Torah, that's represented by what says God spoke. And that's represented by the strings on the tzitzis. And this is what we're going to talk about, God willing, tomorrow. So this now how this works out with Korach and the argument with Moshe, we'll find out. We'll find out. But these are very dynamic principles which are churning around and making the whole world alive. Me and you and everything. We're just taking all this stuff for granted. But the fact of the matter is it's all happening and it's in our hands to change to a certain degree. Why is it in our hands? Because that's the way God decided. God decided to make it that way. Okay, ready? Let's go. All right, here we go. Let us do the Dvar Malchut.